The first time anyone noticed the human was still awake, it was because he laughed at his own joke, loudly, annoyingly, and at precisely the wrong time. The endurance exam had been running for 6 hours. The cadets of the Orion Interstellar Academy were lined up in the trial chamber, eyes sagging, limbs twitching, each of them trapped inside a shimmering dome of hard light projection. The test was simple in description, brutal in practice. Remain alert, remain standing, and endure whatever distractions the simulation fed them. It was not meant to be fun. It was not meant to be survivable for long. Every cadet from every species eventually faltered, whether from sleep deprivation, sensory overload, or simply the grinding psychological weight of time. 6 hours was already considered a respectable performance. The insected Americans had begun to stumble at the 4-hour mark, their delicate wings rattling against the dome walls as their compound eyes fogged with exhaustion. The reptilian SSYH clung stubbornly to alertness, but their bodies cooled in the artificial chill until they slowed, sluggish as stone. Even the Shathri, the proud, tusked warriors who claimed their bloodlines had conquered 10 dying suns, were swaying on their clawed feet, heads drooping. But then the human, Cadet Daniel Reeves of Earth, one exchange recruit out of thousands, suddenly laughed. The sound was so sharp and inappropriate it cracked the concentration of half the chamber. The Shathri tusker beside him snarled, rubbing at his eyes. The proctorbots monitoring the test swiveled their silver heads. And Daniel, grinning like he just heard the funniest thing in the galaxy, muttered to himself, 52 hours and counting. And they said academy training was gonna be hard. At first, no one processed what he'd said. 52 hours? Surely he had misspoken. The endurance test had only been running for 6. But then his dome flickered, replaying his biofeed for confirmation, and the display froze the chamber in shock. His wake cycle was already at 52 continuous hours. The Shathri blinked in disbelief. That is not possible. Check the metrics, one of the insected cadets rasped, mandibles trembling. No sentient physiology sustains without collapse beyond 30. And yet there he was, hair disheveled, eyes red but sparkling with mischief, leaning casually against the dome wall like he'd just woken from a nap. One of the proctorbots buzzed across the chamber, mechanical voice flat. Cadet Reeves. Clarify. Are you claiming voluntary deprivation preceding the test? Daniel gave a half shrug. Pulled an all-nighter playing hollow poker with my squad before this. Didn't think we were starting so early. Then he winked at the nearest cadet, an owl-eyed Karn struggling to keep its feathers from drooping, and added, Don't worry, I'll slow down once you all catch up. The chamber erupted in whispers. The proctorbot paused, lenses whirring. You entered mandatory examination already 46 hours into active consciousness. Yup. Daniel popped the pea like a gunshot. Guess I should have had coffee first. My bad. It was absurd. It was reckless. It was so wildly unorthodox it bordered on suicidal. And yet, somehow, the human was upright. Worse, he was still joking. The stakes of the endurance exam suddenly tilted. It was no longer about who could outlast the others. It was about whether any cadet of any species could last longer than the mad Earthborn who had wandered into the chamber already half dead on his feet and still hadn't slowed down. For the first time in centuries, the alien cadets realized there was a competitor among them they did not understand. The challenge had begun that morning with the usual ceremony. Rows of cadets marched into the Academy's endurance dome, a colossal chamber shaped like a sphere of mirrors. The instructors watched from an observation gallery high above, projecting their cold, critical stares down onto the hopeful recruits. The endurance test was the first of the Academy's crucibles, trials designed not to measure combat skill or knowledge, but simple resilience. Endurance is the foundation of survival. Instructor Vey had barked before they entered. You cannot fight without it. You cannot think without it. You cannot command without it. To endure is to outlast the galaxy itself. The words had rung in their heads as they were sealed inside the dome, each cadet separated into their own projected bubble. The test provided no food, no water, no rest, and no distraction except what the simulation itself chose to torment them with, flickering lights, piercing sounds, waves of artificial heat and cold. The goal was singular: remain conscious, remain upright. Most cadets approached it as a war of attrition. You stilled your body, slowed your breathing, let your mind retreat into a near trance. That was how the Shathri trained, how the SSYTH meditated, how even the insectoids tried to ration their hyperactive nervous systems. But the human had been different from the start. Instead of retreating inward, Daniel had been talking. To himself. To the walls. To his own reflection in the mirrored dome. He cracked jokes. He sang badly under his breath. He recited Earth trivia no one else understood. At first, his neighbors had been annoyed. Then, as exhaustion set in, they realized they were listening despite themselves, his voice a bizarre lifeline in the sterile chamber. Now, at the revelation of his 52 sleepless hours, the mood had shifted from annoyance to awe, and perhaps a little fear. The alien cadets began to react in ways the instructors hadn't predicted. The insectoid Mrkin, who had been one blink away from collapse, forced herself back upright with sudden determination. If this warm blood can endure, then so can I. The tusked Shathri muttered darkly, tusks gnashing, unwilling to be outdone by what they considered a frail species. We do not yield to prey creatures. Even the owl-eyed Karn, usually timid and quick to surrender, flicked his wings back and muttered, if he can laugh at death, then so can we. What had begun as an exam of individual survival was now, somehow, a competition between species pride and one human who had, through sheer foolishness, turned the stakes sideways. Above them in the gallery, the instructors conferred in low voices. Should we disqualify him? One asked, tone sharp. No, another said, eyes glittering. Observe. This is precisely what the crucible is for. He has introduced a new variable, willpower that defies logic. Let us see how the others respond. Time crawled. The test chamber hummed with the faint distortions of the simulation. Hot winds blew, then bone-deep chill. The lights stuttered, strobes stabbing into sensitive eyes. Randomized sounds, alarms, roars, even whispered insults, flooded each cadet's dome. The cadets swayed, blinked furiously, clenched claws and mandibles, every species pushed to the edge. And through it all, Daniel kept talking. He counted the seconds out loud. He told jokes no one else understood, something about chickens crossing roads or about two Martians walking into a bar. He narrated his own state like it was a sports commentary. Hour 53, ladies and gentlemen, and the contestant is feeling good. Knees a little shaky, vision a little fuzzy, but still standing tall. Or at least, leaning medium. Place your bets now, folks, the human might just win it. His dome didn't silence him, didn't filter his words. And though no cadet would admit it, more than one clung to his ridiculous banter like a lifeline. Still, there was unease beneath it. If he truly had been awake for 52 hours already, what would happen when he finally broke? Would it be sudden? Violent? Would his body simply collapse mid-laugh? The uncertainty only sharpened the tension. It wasn't long before the first cadets began to drop. Mrkin folded suddenly, her thin wings collapsing as her body went rigid with exhaustion. A proctor bot whisked her out instantly. The Karn beside Daniel slumped minutes later, eyes closing despite his best effort to echo the human's humor. Daniel only leaned down toward the empty dome beside him, grinned at no one, and said, Guess it's just you and me now, imaginary friend. Somewhere in the observation gallery, one instructor hissed between teeth, He's deranged. Perhaps, another countered, but deranged endurance is still endurance. The unusual situation had created more than just entertainment. It had sparked rivalry, pride, and a deep question the alien cadets were struggling to face. What if humans, strange and small as they were, endured differently than anyone else in the galaxy? And if so, what would that mean for the Academy, for the cadets training beside him, for the species who had always thought themselves superior? The stakes were no longer about passing or failing a test. They were about proving whose species could truly last the longest when the galaxy demanded it. And at the center of it, laughing and muttering jokes to himself in hour 53, was Daniel Reeves, the human no one had expected. By hour 7, the endurance chamber smelled like desperation. Not literally, the domes were sealed and sterile, but the atmosphere of strain was thick enough to taste. Cadets shifted on shaky legs, eyes glazed, muscles trembling. The alien species who had once walked into the crucible with heads high and jaws set were now reduced to haggard shadows of themselves. And the human? He was whistling. A low, tuneless sound that echoed against the mirrored walls of his dome. The Proctorbots didn't stop him. Technically, nothing in the rules forbade it. But for the cadets who could hear faint traces of his noise bleeding through the simulation, it was maddening. At first it was only whistling. Then Daniel began inventing songs. Hour 55 and feeling alive. If I collapse, at least I tried. But if I win, you all should know. I'll buy myself a burrito. The insected cadets twitched in irritation, antennae vibrating with every off-key note. The Shathari Tusker bared his fangs and snarled. Make him stop! But Daniel only winked through his dome and switched to humming an earth lullaby, completely unaware of how insulting it was to sing a sleep song in the middle of an endurance trial. The Karn cadet who had managed to stay awake the longest beside him finally gave in, wings drooping, beak clacking shut as he collapsed to the floor of his dome. A Proctorbot swept him away, leaving Daniel alone again. Another one bites the dust, Daniel crooned cheerfully. Then, as if realizing none of them got the reference, he added, Earth song. Don't worry about it. The instructors in the gallery exchanged tense glances. This is unexpected, one muttered, eyes tracking Daniel's dome feed. His vitals should have been screaming collapse. Cortisol was elevated, his heart rate erratic, his blood pressure flirting with danger. By every physiological standard, he should have been unconscious by now. But instead of falling, he was thriving. Thriving in the strangest possible way. He is destabilizing the others, another instructor observed coldly. Their focus was meant to be inward. He forces it outward, forces them to contend with him. Which, perhaps, is the point, Instructor Vey murmured. The galaxy does not wait politely while you meditate. Perhaps endurance is not simply silence. Perhaps it is noise. The simulation dialed up its intensity. Heat shimmered across the chamber, blistering waves that forced sweat from every cadet's pores. The insectoids flailed, wings sticking to their backs. The reptilian SSYTH slumped further, their bodies slowing under the thermal stress. Even the Shathari Tusker, proud and furious, bent under the sweltering pressure. Daniel tugged at the collar of his academy jumpsuit, face bright red, hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. He staggered, finally, visibly staggered. A few cadets perked up at the sight. Perhaps, finally, the human would break. Then Daniel muttered, Feels like Phoenix in July. No one understood the reference, but he grinned crookedly, eyes unfocused, and whispered to himself, Man, I could kill for some iced tea right now. Instead of faltering, he laughed again. And when the chamber plunged without warning into an Arctic freeze, he just spread his arms wide and muttered, Now that's more like it. Wisconsin winter, baby. The cadets stared in disbelief. The extremes that crushed their concentration seemed, to him, merely familiar. It wasn't that the human was immune. His body shivered violently in the cold, his knees buckled in the heat. But instead of panicking, he reframed it. Turned torment into memory. Turned pain into joke. And that, more than his physiology, was what unsettled the others. The escalation only worsened. Strobe lights blazed in patterns designed to disorient. Shrieking noises cut into the domes, metal scraping, monstrous roars, even distorted voices whispering sleep, give in, collapse. The insected cadets screamed and clawed at their domes, mandibles grinding. The Shathari roared back at the phantom sounds. The SSYTH hissed and swayed, tails lashing desperately. Daniel? He started mimicking the noises. Every time the simulation whispered, Sleep, Daniel whispered back. Not today, buddy. When it roared like a monster, Daniel raised his hands like claws and growled back. Boo! And when the metallic screech rattled the air, He made an exaggerated chalkboard noise with his tongue against his teeth, laughing through his own gag-inducing sound. The cadets around him were half infuriated, half mesmerized. His ridiculous defiance was somehow keeping him afloat, and dragging them into the storm with him. One insectoid, wings shuddering, muttered bitterly, "How can he mock suffering itself?" And the tusked Shathri growled, "He does not mock it. He consumes it. Like fire consuming wood." By hour 10, fewer than half the cadets remained. Daniel was slouched against his dome wall now, legs trembling, eyes bloodshot. He looked wrecked, ruined, a man about to fall. And yet his grin never left. "Hour 60 and still standing, folks," he croaked hoarsely. "Fun fact, world record for sleeplessness back on Earth is, 264 hours. So, you know, only 200 more to go." The cadets gawked. If what he said was true, if humans had actually pushed beyond 10 days awake, that would mean his endurance here was not a fluke, but a glimpse of terrifying potential. The insectoid who had mocked him earlier whispered, almost reverently, "Impossible." The Shathri tusker shook his heavy head. "Not impossible. Human." But then came the complication no one had anticipated. The simulation suddenly projected predators into the domes, beasts crafted from nightmare, claws longer than cadets' arms, eyes glowing with hunger. They stalked closer and closer, jaws dripping phantom saliva, illusions designed to break even the strongest nerves. One cadet shrieked and collapsed instantly. Another swung wildly at the empty air until exhaustion toppled him. Daniel blinked, squinted, and muttered, "Well, you're uglier than my high school gym coach." Then, to the horror of everyone watching, he walked toward the illusion. Of course, he couldn't leave his dome, but he pressed right up against the edge of it, nose to nose with the snarling construct, and crossed his eyes until he started laughing again. "You're not scary. You're just pixelated," he said. "Seen scarier stuff in cheap Earth horror films. $10 at a gas station, man. Try harder." The illusion growled louder, saliva sizzling against the dome, claws raking with sparks. Daniel blew it a kiss. Half the chamber nearly lost their minds. The instructors leaned forward in their gallery, eyes sharp. "Do you see it?" they murmured. "He turns fear into ridicule. He denies the simulation its power by making it absurd. It is unorthodox," another instructor admitted slowly. "But undeniably effective." "And dangerous," a third warned. "If he inspires the others to behave the same, the crucible loses its structure. Chaos follows. Or evolution," they countered. The effect was undeniable. Some of the cadets, watching the human's antics, began imitating him. A Karn puffed his feathers at the illusion, squawking laughter instead of screaming. A Shathri roared not in fear but in mockery, daring the predator closer. For the first time in Academy history, cadets began fighting back against the simulation with humor. Not blades, not claws, not meditation. But laughter. And it worked. Their bodies were still weak, still trembling with exhaustion. But their minds, reframed by the absurdity of the human's defiance, held stronger than before. Of course, not all were convinced. One insectoid glared venomously through her dome, whispering, "He corrupts the trial. He insults our traditions." But even as she said it, her antennae twitched toward the sound of Daniel's latest nonsense. "Knock, knock." Silence. Then he supplied the other half himself. "Who's there?" "Banana." "Banana who? Banana, you glad I'm still awake?" The insectoid stared at him like he was insane. And yet, against her will, her mandibles clicked in what might have been a laugh. The chamber's endurance test had escalated. It was no longer just body against exhaustion, mind against torment. It was ideology against ideology. The old way of silent endurance versus the human way of noisy defiance. And somewhere in the mirrored chaos, the alien cadets realized they were no longer simply competing to outlast one another. They were being forced to reckon with a new, terrifying truth, one that crept into their thoughts with every laugh, every absurd word from the human who should have collapsed hours ago. If humans could turn suffering itself into a joke, How could anyone ever break them? By hour 15, the crucible no longer resembled a test. It was war. The endurance chamber howled with manufactured chaos, heat waves, icy blasts, strobes, predators, alarms, everything layered into a cacophony designed to break the strongest minds. The few cadets left upright looked like corpses propped on strings, their limbs trembling, their eyes sunken into dark sockets. Sweat dripped, claws twitched, wings sagged. Every breath was a battle. And yet, cutting through the misery, there was still that voice. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel croaked hoarsely, swaying like a man drunk on his own exhaustion. "Welcome to hour 67 of How Long Can a Human Embarrass the Galaxy's Finest Before Collapsing? Current bet pool has me lasting another, let's say infinity hours. Odds not great, but hey, house always wins." The cadets glared at him through their domes. Some with hatred, some with awe, and some with the hollow-eyed desperation of soldiers who no longer knew whether to cling to him or curse him. The instructors in the gallery leaned forward. They had seen cadets endure pain. They had seen them endure silence, hunger, and fear. But never had they seen one endure by mocking the very concept of endurance itself. It was time, they decided, to push the crucible beyond precedent. Without warning, the chamber shifted. The mirrored walls dissolved into endless void, stars blazing in infinite directions. Gravity lurched sideways, then dropped, then twisted until cadets screamed, clutching for stability. Each dome simulated the sensation of being hurled into vacuum. No ground, no sky, only spinning darkness. One cadet's mind shattered instantly. A Shathri roared in terror, tusks gnashing, body convulsing before collapse. A Ssyth hissed weakly, tail thrashing until he toppled. The insectoids, their nervous systems overloaded, crumpled one by one like brittle shells. The chamber emptied of cadets at a horrifying pace. Within minutes, only 4 remained. A Shathri tusker, panting and trembling but upright. A Karn-eyed cadet, feathers puffed in panic. One insectoid, antennae quivering, mandibles clenched. And the human, Daniel Reeves, slouched against his dome wall, grinning deliriously at the void. "Well," he muttered, eyes flickering in opposite directions, "this feels familiar. Finals week back home. 3 essays due, 2 exams, and only coffee in my bloodstream. Same vibes. Less stars, though." The void bent, warped, and spun faster. The remaining cadets cried out, some curling into balls on the floor of their domes. Daniel whispered, "We," like he was riding a carnival ride. In the observation gallery, voices hissed, "This is madness. He should be unconscious by now. And yet he stands. His resilience corrupts the others. They cling to him. We must end this before discipline collapses." But Instructor Vase shook her head, eyes gleaming. "No. This is the moment. Push them further. If the human breaks here, they will see he is still mortal. And if he does not, then we must learn why." The simulation changed again. This time, it didn't attack the senses. It attacked the soul. The domes flickered, and suddenly every cadet stood in a different illusion, alone, isolated, stripped of the other's presence. Each one faced visions drawn from the deepest recesses of their psyche. Failures, fears, losses. The Shathri tusker saw his homeworld battlefield burning, his tusks shattered, his ancestors spitting their contempt at him. The insectoid saw her brood nest abandoned, her larvae shriveled, her queen turning away in disgust. The Karn saw himself cast from his flock, wings broken, forever flightless. And Daniel. He blinked into a vision of a darkened earth street. Empty houses. Silent windows. A door creaked open, revealing the faint glow of a kitchen light. And there, at the table, sat his grandmother, warm smile, hands folded, plate of cookies waiting. The sight hit harder than any predator. His chest clenched. His throat burned. "Danny," she said gently, voice like sunlight. "Come sit. You've been awake too long. Rest now. No shame in closing your eyes." His body screamed yes. His legs buckled toward the chair. His arms trembled with longing for the warmth of home, for the comfort of surrender. The instructors in the gallery leaned forward sharply. This was it. Not heat, not cold, not predators nor void. Family. Nostalgia. That was the dagger no cadet could ignore. Daniel's knees touched the chair. His hands touched the table. His eyes fluttered. Then he started laughing. It was broken, delirious laughter, the sound of a man standing on the edge of collapse and somehow finding the edge funny. Really? He croaked, voice raw. Cookies? You went with cookies? Oh man, you should have picked pizza. Way harder to resist. The illusion flickered uncertainly, as though the simulation itself doubted. His grandmother frowned, eyes tightening with stern disappointment. You dishonor yourself, Daniel. Sit. Rest. Fail. He leaned forward until his forehead touched the phantom table. His shoulders shook violently. Then he looked up, eyes bloodshot and blazing with something fierce. Sorry, Nana, he rasped. But I promised myself I'd never quit on a game of endurance chicken. And this? He gestured weakly at the collapsing kitchen. This is just another all-nighter. The illusion shattered. In the other domes, the cadets buckled under their visions. The insectoid collapsed, shrieking her queen's name. The Karn gave a pitiful cry and folded, feathers scattering as the proctorbot whisked him away. Only two remained. The Shathri Tusker, massive frame trembling, tusks gnashing as he faced his phantom ancestors. And Daniel, half collapsed, laughing through bloodshot tears at an empty void. The chamber hummed with silence now, every proctorbot frozen mid-hover, every instructor leaning forward. The trial had reached its apex, one of the galaxy's most formidable warrior species versus one human who should have been unconscious 50 hours ago. The Tusker roared. It was a sound that shook the dome walls, rattled the gallery, sent vibrations crawling through the cadets who had already been ejected. He slammed his fists against his dome, tusks gouging sparks from the hard light. I will not be outlasted by a frail creature of dirt, he bellowed. We are Shathri! Blood of warriors! Flame of suns! We endure forever! For the galaxy, the questions it raised were only just beginning. He threw his entire weight against his dome wall, snarling, eyes wild. His ancestors screamed in his ears, demanding his strength, demanding his victory. Daniel blinked at him from his own dome, swaying. He looked like a scarecrow left too long in the rain, ruined, wrecked, barely upright. His lips cracked as he grinned. Hey, buddy, he rasped. Want to know Earth's greatest endurance secret? The Tusker snarled, chest heaving. Daniel leaned against his dome, eyes unfocused, grin lopsided. We suffer for fun. And then he started to laugh again. The gallery erupted. Instructors gasped, some furious, some stunned into silence. The Tusker howled, pounding his dome wall until cracks of light spiderwebbed across its surface. He refused to collapse, refused to yield, roaring until his throat tore. But Daniel's laughter kept cutting through the roar. Not mocking. Not cruel. Just relentless. The laugh of a man who had already suffered and found the absurdity in it. The Tusker's body trembled. His tusks gouged sparks. His eyes rolled back. And finally, after another 20 minutes of stubborn resistance, he collapsed. The proctorbot whisked him away, leaving only Daniel Reeves, alone in the chamber, still swaying on unsteady legs. He blinked blearily around at the void, grinned through cracked lips, and whispered, 69 hours, baby. Nice. Then, at last, his body gave out, and he fell, unconscious before he even hit the floor. The proctorbots caught him before impact. The chamber went silent. And above, in the gallery, the instructors sat in stunned silence at the sight of one unconscious, grinning human who had endured beyond reason, beyond biology, beyond expectation. The crucible was over. But for the Academy. When Daniel Reeves woke, he was convinced he was dead. The ceiling above him was a smooth dome of white light, humming faintly with the sterile buzz of medical equipment. The air smelled of antiseptic. His arms ached. His throat felt like sandpaper had been dragged across it. For a moment, he thought he was still in the crucible chamber, trapped in another layer of simulation. But then he blinked, groaned, and realized he was strapped to a medbed in the Academy infirmary, wires stuck to his skin, monitors chirping at his side. "Still alive?" he croaked. "Guess that ruins my funeral plans." A metallic voice clicked from the corner. "Cadet Reeves, you have regained consciousness." One of the Proctorbots hovered nearby, its lenses glowing. Its tone was flat as always, but something in the pause before it spoke suggested surprise. Daniel tried to sit up, failed, then just flopped back against the bed with a grin. "So, did I win?" the bot whirred. "You endured for 71 hours of active consciousness, including 20 hours within the crucible trial. No other cadet has approached such duration. Victory is yours." Daniel pumped a weak fist into the air. "Knew it." Then, after a beat, he groaned. "Can I get that in writing? Like a trophy? Maybe a t-shirt?" The bot ignored the request. News traveled fast. By the time Daniel was stabilized enough to sit upright, cadets from every species had gathered outside the infirmary glass, staring in disbelief. The ones who had collapsed earliest looked ashamed, others gazed at him with a strange, fearful respect. The Shathri Tusker, massive even seated in a hoverchair, tusks bandaged from where he'd nearly cracked them on the dome wall, sat brooding near the front. His burning eyes never left the human. Daniel, sipping weakly at a cup of electrolyte fluid, raised it toward him in a mock toast. "Good game, big guy." The Tusker rumbled low in his throat, tusks clacking, but said nothing. His pride was wounded, but his silence wasn't hatred, it was something heavier. Recognition. For the first time in Academy history, a Shathri warrior had been outlasted. Not by another warborn predator. Not by a creature of claw and fang. But by a human, a species the Shathri had privately considered little more than fragile primates with loud voices. And that changed everything. Later that evening, the surviving cadets were summoned to the central hall for debriefing. The instructors sat in high seats along the dais, robes glimmering with the insignia of the Orion Interstellar Academy. Their faces were unreadable. The cadets shuffled in with varying degrees of exhaustion and shame. Only Daniel arrived with a lopsided grin, though he had to lean heavily on a hover crutch to keep himself upright. The hall buzzed with whispers. "That's him. The human who lasted 71 hours. Impossible. No, worse. It means they don't break the way we do." Instructor Vey raised a hand, silencing the noise. Her eyes, sharp as plasma fire, swept the assembly. "This crucible has revealed much," she intoned. "Many cadets endured admirably. Some fell honorably. All have learned. But one cadet," her gaze flicked to Daniel, "has defied our expectations entirely." The murmurs rose again, cadets shifting uncomfortably. Vey continued. "We designed the crucible to measure silence, restraint, internal focus. To teach endurance as we understood it. Yet Cadet Reeves showed us another path, endurance not of silence, but of defiance. Not of stillness, but of noise. He endured by transforming suffering into absurdity. By making pain laughable." Daniel raised a hand weakly. "Hey, to be fair, I wasn't trying to revolutionize your whole philosophy. I was just really sleep-deprived." A ripple of laughter, tired but real, echoed through the hall. The instructors did not stop it. Vey inclined her head slightly. "Nevertheless, intent does not negate result. The galaxy teaches us that strength comes in many forms. Today, humanity has taught us that resilience is not always silent." Her voice sharpened, ringing against the hall walls. "Learn this lesson well, cadets. For in battle, in survival, in command, there will come moments when silence breaks, when meditation fails, when discipline falters. In such moments, it may be madness that saves you. And perhaps madness is its own form of strength." The cadets sat in stunned silence. After the assembly, cadets approached Daniel in small groups. Some with awe. Some with envy. Some with questions they didn't know how to ask. The insectoids, usually disdainful of mammalian fragility, bowed stiffly and muttered, "Your methods are unconventional, but respected." The Karn, feathered wings rustling, squawked nervously. How do you turn suffering into humor?" Daniel scratched his messy hair, still leaning on his crutch, and shrugged. "Honestly? If you don't laugh at it, it eats you alive. And I've had enough nights back home where laughing was the only way to stay awake. You guys call it madness. We just call it finals week." The Karn tilted his head, not understanding, but filed the answer away with the seriousness of a sacred teaching. The Shathari Tusker approached last. He loomed over Daniel, tusks glinting, chest still bandaged. For a long moment he just stared down. Daniel looked up, met his burning gaze, and grinned. "You almost had me. If that trial went another 5 minutes, I'd be face-planted." The Tusker's voice rumbled low. 5 minutes is not almost." Then, to everyone's shock, he extended a massive clawed hand. Daniel blinked, then reached up and shook it, his smaller hand dwarfed. "You are prey no longer," the Tusker rumbled. "You are a rival." The story spread across the Academy like wildfire. It spread beyond the Academy, carried by cadets' messages to their home worlds, whispered among fleets, recorded in the databanks. A single phrase began to circulate among alien species whenever they spoke of humans. "They suffer for fun." Some said it with awe. Others with fear. A few with disdain. But none ignored it. You could never, ever outlast a human. In time, military tacticians dissected the crucible footage, studying Daniel's laughter, his mockery of fear, his reframing of pain. Psychologists debated whether it was genius or insanity. Cultural scholars wondered what kind of world raised a species that laughed at torment and endured beyond reason. And slowly, across the galaxy, the myth of human resilience began to take root. Daniel, for his part, didn't care much for myth. The next morning, still groggy and bandaged, he found himself in the mess hall. His squad mates cheered, clapping him on the back, shoving extra trays of food his way. He dug into a mountain of eggs and synthetic bacon with the ravenous fury of a man who hadn't eaten in 3 days. "Dude," one of his squad mates whispered in awe. "You're a legend now. Did you know that?" Daniel, mouth full, mumbled, "I just want a nap." Another cadet leaned forward eagerly. "Tell us the secret. How'd you do it?" Daniel swallowed, wiped his mouth, and said, "Coffee. Regret. And a really bad sense of humor." They laughed, but in the back of their minds the truth lingered. It wasn't just coffee. It wasn't just humor. It was something stranger, deeper, something that made humans terrifying in ways no one had predicted. Later, as Daniel finally collapsed into his bunk for real sleep, he muttered into his pillow, 71 hours. Beat that, Galaxy." And as his eyes fluttered shut, he smiled one last time. Because he knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. Humans weren't the strongest, or the fastest, or the fiercest species in the galaxy. But when it came to endurance, when it came to sheer stubborn refusal to quit, when it came to turning suffering into a joke and madness into survival, the galaxy had just learned the hard way.